Good evening. Welcome to you all. We're glad you're here. Step back a little to this meeting. This is an informational meeting formed by a grassroots group to create and disseminate information, equip those with interest involved in the proposed 200-plus wind turbine industrial development in Republic County. Our goal is to encourage Republic County residents to become informed about the economic, environmental, health, and visual impact of wind turbine industrial development can have on our county. Our group is hosting this event this evening to help reach that goal. We hope to find this evening's program informative, impactful, as we all try to decide how to handle what will be the biggest project in Republic County history. And they asked me to announce there is coffee in there if those wish to have some. So to get us off, now we'll have Kurt Childs go through the economic boom or bust of wind turbines.
Okay, like Terry said, thanks for coming. I just want to start out, I'm far from an expert. I've done a lot of research and tried to outline what this is going to be for Republic County. So first of all, most everybody's seen kind of what's been in the paper, just a few things. What we know, just want to give you some information. They're talking approximately 185 turbines in Republic County. Not set yet, we don't know. These will be the largest structures in Kansas. They're talking two different heights. Most of them will be 580 feet to the top of the blade. That will be the largest structures in Kansas. You can see from the map too that Mike has pulled up over there. That's a lot. The yellow is where the proposed ones were based on FAA applications. So it's just kind of a visual for you. So with this project, High Banks Wind NextEra has talked about pilot payments. These would happen for the first 10 years. I'll get into more of that. There's a proposed property tax that would start in year 11. This would also be not only the tallest structures, it would be the largest single project in the state currently. Currently, most leases are signed for people that want to sign them, and the county commissioners are going to have to approve. Marshall County was the most recent one. They did 5 use permits, basically. Road use permit, conditional use permit. There was 5 at the most recent one next week. Okay, so the lease payments, these are just rough numbers. We don't know exactly what everybody signed up for or don't want to know, but these are basically from the contracts we've seen, this is what they amount to. So 5,000 per megawatt based on the nameplate, which is what's on the turbine. So you're talking, they're 2.4 to 2.8 megawatt turbines, so that's 12 to 14,000 per tower. Based on public record, 39% are absentee landowners of the people that have signed leases. Doesn't mean that's exactly who's going to get turbines. Gross domestic product, total amount of money in Republic County. Last 10 years, it's varied, but $240 million moves around in Republic County on a given year. So this would be a 0.5% increase in our GDP. 0.5%. Not very much money. Probably what it did yesterday in the grain markets. A couple other quick things. Inflation. These payments don't increase until 1 year after the turbines are operational. So we all know what inflation was, 8.5% that came out a couple days ago. Question, how many lease payments will Warren County in 10, 20, 30 more years with absentee landowners increasing? Pilot payments, this is rough figures based on what Marshall County did. And Marshall County went live in December. It was the same NextEra company. Basically, they got $400,000 a year, and this goes to the county as a gift from the company. $3,700 per tower, or about $685,000 per year for the 185 turbines, which equals to about 7 mils, if you guys are familiar with the mills. 5% of our $13.7 million budget. Question we asked the commissioners, will that be adjusted for inflation as well? If it's not, you know, I think I figured by year 10, we're down to about 3% of the budget instead of 5. Comparables to that 685,000, 40 cents per day per citizen. You can do the math on that. $110 per acre increase on ag land taxes.
What? $1.
$1, I'm sorry, $1.10 per acre. And then an $80 a year increase on a house tax. And those are based on the mill levy and a $100,000 house. So property taxes after year 10. So these pilot payments are the first 10 years. After year 10, property taxes are supposed to kick in. Currently, there's no wind energy company in Kansas paying property taxes on turbines. So, say that again, there's no wind energy company currently paying taxes in Kansas. So after year 11, based on current law, they value the turbines at 20% of their total value, and that is supposed to be set, and that's what the property taxes are supposed to be in year 11. So if we value that 20% in year 1, property taxes should be $4.5 million. So first 10 years, each year they're getting a $3.8 million tax break. And that's only valued at 20%. That's not valued at 100% like any of your commercial property might. There are also issues that can come up, which obviously nobody's paying, so it hasn't been litigated, there hasn't been any law. Repowering, if they put on new blades or a new turbine, that could possibly kick in the extra 10 years of pilot payments or no payments at all. There's some that think there's going to be a ton of lawsuits when that starts happening. And then the wind lobby, there's a lot of money in this, so they're pretty strong in the state, and we'll probably hear more about that later. A lot of numbers here. I didn't mention earlier, but my presentation I gave to the commissioners is over. If you guys want to dive into it tonight, we got plenty of copies. Real quick, it's really hard to figure out what energy production is with the turbine. It varies. Obviously today is good, but Sunday night they're not even turning. So you have to use an average, and the amount of time they run during a day is just highly variable. But if you take 12 hours a day, and they're running at half capacity, basically an average turbine would be $200,000 per year. And that's just the energy production. So for 185, that's $37 million. Now, there's a thing called a federal production tax credit. That is basically what's been in place for quite a while. And at the federal level, they get $18 per megawatt. So that would be another $40 million per year that they would get. So if you add up our $685,000 of pilot payments and 1.4 of lease payments, and that would be the people that live here throughout the absentee landowners, because that money's not coming to Republic County. That's 2.1, and the wind company would be $78 million per year. And if you take that times 10, those numbers even get a little bit crazier. So our share is 2.7. Now, that's a rough estimate, like I said, that we don't know exactly, but that is best we can do with the information we have. I don't want to take too much time because there's better speakers than me coming, but other financial issues, property values. If you have a house inside of this, property values will probably go down. Jobs, they're saying 12 to 14. The last two that went live has been 3 to 5. So, and some of those don't even live in the area. There's a lot of specialized jobs that come in for 2 weeks and then they leave. Decommissioning, this is the big one, and I don't know a lot about it. There'll probably be other people talk about it, but who's going to take them down and how are they going to pay for it? The most recent that I could find was in 2019 or 2020, and it was $500,000 to take one down. So, liability, population decline will continue. Who's going to want to build a house inside of this footprint? Or any footprint for that matter. I'm sure there'll be many more coming. So, like I said, keep this short. There's big money for wind company in this. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars over the years, and not very much for us. And yeah, we do get a little bit of money, but what are we giving up? And we'll talk more about that coming down the road. So after tonight, I just wanted to throw this out there. Like I said, county commissioners have to sign use permits, and at this point, that is going to be our best avenue, is to voice your concerns to our county commissioners. And we can help you out if you don't know whose yours is, but if you have concerns, that's who you need to voice it to. So, with that, next we're going to have a couple testimonials. We have a video one, and the sound's a little bit shaky for the first minute, so bear with us. But it gets better, and then I'll introduce our speaker that drove from the other.
Good evening, my name is Mona Musil. My husband and I farm west of Blue Rapids. For the last several years, we've been involved with the Concerned Citizens Group related to Irish Creek. We've had 4 purposes. We wanted to fight for setbacks, reasonable setbacks. We wanted to slow down the project and give people time to be educated. We also wanted to educate people as we learned. And finally, we wanted to protect the Flint Hills in the southern part of Marshall County. Unfortunately, we were able to only accomplish one of those goals, just educating the public on what an industrial wind project would be like in Marshall County. We had no setback because our commissioners felt like they could better cite them one by one. I'm going to give you some stats about Irish Creek to give you an idea if that worked or not. We have 20 non-participators who have turbines 2,000 to 2,500 feet from their home. Unbelievably, we have 2 families who have 9 turbines within 1 mile of their house. We had an extended family who signed up for 17 turbines. Not one family member lives within 2 miles of a turbine. And just a couple, there's many stories I could tell you, but just a couple brief ones. We have a family with 6 children who have a turbine 550 feet from their family swimming fishing pond. There's also a family right on the other side of the Marshall County Pot County line. They've had trouble sleeping. Even though Pot County has a moratorium on wind turbines, they're close enough to the wind turbine in Marshall County that it's affecting their way of life. So the question we all have to ask in regards to setbacks is it safe for non-participating members? And also, does everyone's property rights matter? Should people be able to use their own property in a safe and healthy way? Some more information on Irish Creek. We have 119 landowners in the footprint. 34 signed contracts, 85 did not. Of the 34, 75% do not live in Irish Creek. Of those 8 who signed and live in Irish Creek, at least several of them did not sign up the parcel that their house is on. To me, the worst part of industrial wind is that you're gonna run into a lot of broken relationships. Frankfurt has been divided. Neighbors who've always gotten along aren't speaking. Families have been divided. And that seems to happen when industrial wind comes into an area. Bless Mike Thompson. He is the only one who has made an effort to try to protect non-participators all over Kansas. There were 2 bills that came up this year in the Utilities Committee. I attended both hearings. Neither made it out of committee. Mike can tell you more about that. But as I left from each hearing, I was very confident that the wind lobby and wind attorneys in Kansas have a big influence on our legislators. I hope that things will be different if you proceed with your project in Republic and Washington counties, that the commissioners will represent all residents, non-participating and participating, that they will move ahead at a speed that's best for the county, not necessarily next era's timeline, which they will have. And also that those who've signed contracts will be concerned about their neighbors, that they'll also fight for decent setbacks, and that they'll be the first ones who say, put the turbines closest to me. We fully believe that NextEra or other wind companies will be back in Marshall County as long as the generous government subsidies exist. And the problems and the battles will continue as long as wind companies continue to put so many turbines between so many homes. Thank you.
Okay, so she was from, just quick, she was from Marshall County, and that was the one that went live that I referenced when I was talking. They went live in December of last year. So. Next we have Brian Hoover. He is from Chanute, is that correct? Galesburg, okay, down in Neosho County. He has lived, I'll let him kind of explain everything that he's done, but he's graciously driven up tonight. It's a long drive, and he's going to give us a testimony of what it's like to live next to some wind turbines.
Good evening. It's kind of strange for me to look out across a crowd of people. I know everybody in Neosho County, and to look at a crowd of people and know one other person here, my wife, and I guess I know Mike Thompson too. My wife and I grew up in Neosho County. I worked for a feed manufacturer, Cargill, for a few years and was gone, but we came back to Neosho County and owned and operated a feed milling facility, and we still run cattle. We sold the business a year and a half ago. Semi-retired, now I'm just running cattle. But 2 or 3 years ago, Apex Clean Energy, it's Apex, started leasing ground in Neosho County. We have one large landowner, runs a construction company, doesn't live in the county, Eastern Construction. Leased about a third of all the ground that they needed to put 139 wind turbines up. A couple of other absentee landowners got that number up to about 50%, and before they even started, and then they started, you go to the neighbor and say, you're going to have to look at these ugly things anyway, so you might as well lease, and that got them some more dirt. The county appraiser in Neosho County investigated carefully and determined that the improvements, not the dirt, because you're not going to change the value of the dirt very much. The value of the improvements would decrease between 10 and 40%, depending on how close those homes were to the wind turbines. In Neosho County, that's between $25 and $32 million of lost market value. Of Of course, you gotta have several years of houses selling for less than they used to be worth before you get any kind of property tax assessed valuation change. But that's a problem that you're going to have. In Neosho County, our population is quite a bit greater. We have 511 homes in the Turbine footprint, and I don't know what, maybe 18 leaseholders living in that footprint, something like that. I think there's 60 or 70 total owners, but a lot of them are 2 or 3 generations away from living on that ground, just absentee landowners. My biggest beef has always been, different than hers by the way, is that these things are terribly noisy. You can drive to a wind farm and so on the road and listen, and you think, oh, that's not too bad. But you should sit in your car and roll down the window and lay back and think, can I sleep through this crap? And the answer is no, you can't. We suspected that would be the case based on other people's experience in other places in the country. In Neosho County, the setbacks that the county agreed to was 1,600 feet, 1,640 feet to an non-participating person. The nearest turbine to our house, however, are 3,000 feet. And a couple of nights a week, when they're running, they're loud enough to wake you up in the house. Because we have wind turbines north and south of our house, and close enough east or west that we can see in any direction that we look. There really isn't a time that the wind direction is such that you're not impacted. If the wind's blowing and they are operating the wind turbines, they're noisy. If you enjoy a spring day and you have a little breeze and you can open the windows, you just might as well get past that. You're not going to do that anymore. They're noisy enough that the only small respite you have from the noise is that you close the windows and draw the blinds, and you'll buy heavier curtains because those help a little bit in order to get away from the noise. I don't know if NextEra does the same misleading representation of the sound from wind turbines. They'll tell you that it's 9 louder than the air conditioner outside your house or 9 louder than the refrigerator. Those things are monotones that you kind of can tune out. Wind turbines, the sound is coming off of the blade tip as they turn. And because of the way they're designed, the tip speed, regardless of the height of the wind turbine, the tip speed is about 180 miles an hour. So people that compare those to airplanes landing, they're not far off because the wind turbine blades are shaped like a wing on an airplane. So they're not really a blade, they're a airfoil, like a wing on an airplane. And because they're turning as they pass in front of the tower, they make a honking noise or a swishing noise. And so every second and a half you get a real high spiking noise, followed by quite a bit of relatively quieter time period. So on the average, it's quieter than when you're taking the reading with a decibel meter. I like to, I'll give you an example. My wife has chickens. For a while, we had a couple of roosters that if you got up at night and turned on the light, they crowed. If a car drove down the road, they crowed. If the moon came up, they crowed. We don't have those roosters anymore. Those roosters, the crowing rooster is about 70 decibels, and that's what the spike of a wind turbine is when it goes around. So that's the kind of noise that you'll have outside your house. On the average, it's not very, but if you just took a hammer and stood and beat on an anvil, you can't get up to the average sound level that a wind turbine has because you can't hit it fast enough. The spiking nature and the fact that the sound from a wind turbine is so acute and then much milder makes it impossible to ignore. During the day, it's always there. You go outside and whatever you're doing, there's a 600-foot tall monster turning it at blade tip speed 180 miles an hour. So it just completely changes the flavor of living in the country. I mean, as we drove up here, 50 years ago, I had cousins that lived in Belleville. They moved away and haven't been back for 50 years. But this is a beautiful country. I mean, you know, it's a different kind of pretty than southeast Kansas, but you know, we lived in Iowa, we lived in Missouri, we lived in Maryland for a while. We came back to Kansas because there's something unique about Kansas. And, where we live, it's not like that anymore. There will be people, if you build these things, there will be people who move. You know, we've looked at homes in the next county south, which is Levack County. They're talking about wind turbines down there now too. So I don't know how that's going to work out. But in any case, living around these things is not like living in the country. It just isn't. We'll talk about safety for a minute. We've kind of forced the wind Apex, the developer down there, to do a study on safety in these things. If they turn when it's icing conditions, they accumulate ice. If they don't get them shut off, that ice sheds off the blades and throws it. You know, how far, if something left the blade at 180 miles an hour, 600 feet in the air, how far will it go? There's an outfit out of Georgia that's an engineering outfit that does these kind of calculations, and they determined that a chunk of ice would travel about 3,000 feet if through a piece of ice. Now, they're supposed to shut them off if they ice up. I will tell you, by the way, that when they do ice up, you know it's happened because they get a lot louder, significantly louder. The county commissioners had lots and lots of complaints in early January. We had a foggy icing event, and you really thought they were coming through the door, and they got really loud. If a blade fails, he'll throw a chunk of blade the same way. So when they saw in the literature that Nextera says, yeah, 1,500 feet is the standard setback. 1,500 feet was the standard setback in the early 1990s when wind turbines were 250 feet tall and they were less than a quarter of the capacity of these things. They've gotten larger and larger and larger, and they haven't gotten farther and farther away from people's homes. The Vesta, that made the ones in Neosho County, tells their operators that not to approach a wind turbine within 1,650 feet that's operating, but they'll put them that close to your house. And that's what their plan is here. And somebody told me that the setback from a road is about 500 feet. That means that any time that you're underneath that thing, you know, there is some risk. It may not be a very big risk. They determined it was maybe not much. The average risk for people living under a wind turbine wasn't maybe much worse than your chance of being in a deadly car crash. Well, you know, I had no chance of dying in a car crash in my home, in my bed, before they put these things up. I'm not really very happy about the fact that now I have risk in my home, but that's the situation. Debbie found a news report that your county commissioners hired a legal firm out of Wichita, an attorney named Vaugh, to represent the county. You should look real seriously at that outfit. This attorney Vaugh has done nothing but work for wind farms, writing contracts that have no teeth in them at all. They wrote the contract for Neosho County as well. The sound standard that they agreed to was only 20 times the sound pressure that the World Health Organization says is acceptable, 20 times. And they recently did a sound study and they can't meet that. So these things are loud enough that they're going to be annoying. They're loud enough that they're going to you're going to lose some sleep. The wind farm industry will tell you that nobody's proved that when you lose sleep from being woken up by wind turbines, that will affect your health. But there's not really anybody that's stupid, I don't think. But there probably hasn't been research to prove something so obvious. Every hospital in the nation has a sleep disorders clinic. Every one of them does. There's a doctor, and then there's sound you can't hear, the infrasound, the stuff that's low enough in frequency. And I describe that if you're setting a stop sign and somebody with a boombox in their car is coming up on you, the first thing you do is you feel it shaking. And when they get a little closer, then you hear a little bit of music, and then when they get real up close to you, you can hear the tune. That shaking that you felt before you heard anything is low frequency sound. Some of that's infrasound. Some people can hear it, some people can't. It just depends on how good you're hearing it. As at my age, I can't hear a lot of that, but I can feel it. And I feel it when I'm in bed at night. So putting in the earplugs doesn't help on those nights. The sound is worse if you're directly behind, downwind of the wind turbine. It's bad in front of them, and it's directly behind them, but off to the side, the swishing is worse, but the sound pressure is different. Using the decibel range to measure sound is a really crappy way of determining what you got. And I'll give you an example. The organ player at the church can do pretty amazing things on a piano, and your 4-year-old grandchild can make as much noise. So it's not the same. It's like 45 decibels of chainsaw or 45 decibels of country music. You know, sound pressure, because you're measuring it, it's in some pressure unit over time, is what you're measuring, and it's a really poor way of measuring sound. So you need a lot more complicated sound criteria in your contract, or it's going to be really annoying. And if you have Bloth do that for you, you're not going to get anything. You're not going to get anything that's enforceable. I can just tell you, because that's the way that they write the contracts. If they've hired these people, they've hired the flocks of guarded chicken house is what they've done. They need to get somebody else. There are some good attorneys. I mean, Patrick Hughes out of Wichita, with Adams Jones law firm, defended Wabunsee County when they fought wind developer, and they took it all the way to state Supreme Court. And Wabunsee County doesn't have a win. So, what a mess. Debbie won't get up here and talk to you, but oh, the lights. Yes. We have a disagreement. She thinks the lights are the worst thing, and they are really annoying. One of the things about living in the country, and it's stupid, but I get up pretty frequently when there's a meteor shower. Someday you'll see a really spectacular meteor shower. I've seen a couple in my life, and but about 10 or 15 times a year you can get up and watch, for meteor showers. Well, you can't do that with wind turbines around here because they flash and they keep your eyes overwhelmed enough that you can't see the little meteors. And the other thing is that you're someplace at night and you're driving home and you're driving into this monstrous flashing blob area. And where we live, it's 139 turbines, and the ground's not quite as, it's probably about the same amount of rolling hills. The curves are a little more gradual out here, but it's up and down. And we can see them from about 40 miles. They're 607 feet. Somebody told me that the FAA filing was 650 here, so I'd be surprised if they're less than 600 feet. What they do. So, anyway. What else? There's a tremendous amount of money. We're not here talking about dollars. The production tax credit makes it so incredibly lucrative to the wind developers that they'll do anything. They'll pay anybody that will take a bribe. They'll tell you any lie they think they can get away with. I used to think I was being hard on them to call them carpetbaggers, but that's what it is. They're here to take something of value from you. 10 years from now, the production tax credit will run out, and if the federal government hasn't got a re-up program like we talked about repowering, where they just take them down and put up another one, they get to call it brand new and they get another 10 years of production tax credit. If that doesn't happen, they're done. Most of the income is tax credit, and that 18 cents, the 1.8 cents per kilowatt hour is not enough to maintain these things. It just isn't. So at some point, if you don't have if they agree on a contract and they don't have a decommissioning plan, that $500,000 apiece is going to fall on the county, which the county can't afford. So then it goes back to the farmer, and they'll just stand there until they rot. Or the FAA says, take them down, or we'll take them down and send you a bill, which is what really happened. So you torch them off the ground and they'll lay there until somebody comes along and salvages what they want, and the farmer will burn the rest of them in some dark, windless night. That's what happened, because they're just too expensive. $14,000 a year potentially for a turbine location for 10 years is $140,000, and $500,000 to take them down. There's no money in this thing for the local people. There just isn't. Short term there is, but I just don't see the upside, and you won't either. We talked about the people who have relationships with neighbors. You're going to find out who cares about you and who doesn't. That's what you're going to find out, and that's probably ignorance is bliss. We thought that actually they're good, I guess. But there's a lot of people down there that don't care. So I hope that's not your community. We have 511 homes in a wind farm that's about half this size. And it's been a real eye-opener. And I wish you better. I'll shut up. I'm sure I've taken too much time already. The thing I'll tell you is this is farther along than you think. If you want to stop this thing, you've got to raise hell right now. You got to be hateful. That's just the truth, because it's going to be, in Neosho County, when the county finally signed the contracts to allow them to use the roads, Apex had sold this wind farm 8 months earlier to Liberty Empire. I mean, there's a lot of stuff happening and they've spent a lot of money. They've got a lot of potential profit that's driving them to do the things that they do. So you got to work real hard if you want to fix this. So good luck.
Thank you, Brian, for your information.
Hold on a second. Just for reference, you said 500 and how many rooms?
511.
You shut this one light off over here back here. We have 176 homes with 185 towers in here. So just to overlay the homes in this small little footprint, just to give perspective of what we just said. Okay?
One thing I didn't say was the wind turbines we have are 2.2 megawatts, and yours are going to be close to 3. The sound that's propagated off of these is directly proportional to the rating. So your wind turbines are going to be 25% louder than our wind turbines. And you need extra setback for that.
Yes, they're saying 1,500 here.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, before I start introducing our next speaker, let's just, everybody kind of sit back, listen, be courteous and polite. This is just an informational meeting. There's no need to throw up your hands and want to argue about stuff. That's not what we're here for tonight. It's information only, and take what from you will. Kind of like a smorgasbord, just enjoy it. Our next speaker comes to us from Kansas City, who spent 42 years as a chief meteorologist there in Kansas City. He created an outdoor classroom for students and has a World Book record for having 250,000 students attend his classes. You teachers in here, that's a lot of kids. He spent years studying the issues around these renewable energy projects, speaking as a consultant and advisor to communities faced with implementation of the industrial scale wind plants in the area. His 45 years of experience in meteorology and his stance on the debunking of climate change led the Heartland Institute to list him as one of their policy advisors. He's speaking to us today as Executive Director of the Academy of Climate and Energy Analysis, a 501c3 dedicated to education of climate and energy. Also, on top of all that, everything else he does, he serves as state senator for District 10 in the state of Kansas and is the chairman of the State Utility Commission. Please welcome Senator Mike Thompson.
Thank you very much. Brian and Kurt did a great job covering an awful lot of material on some of the sound issues. I'll probably get myself organized here. Might make a few comments on some of the things they said before we get started. First of all, I am a state senator, but I am speaking as executive director of the Climate and Energy Analysis. I have to be careful about what I do as a state senator, so I will speak about some of the things we've done in the legislature, but this, again, as we mentioned, this is for education and information. I'm going to speak to both those who might be considering a lease and those who are against it, so you kind of understand what you're up against. And Brian did a good job, Kurt did a good job about some of the economics. I do want to start by telling you, I live in Johnson County. Why am I fighting this battle? I grew up in southeast Kansas. I grew up in Coffee County in Burlington. They've got wind farms in northern Coffee County. I've seen what it's done to communities all over the state. I love rural Kansas. I grew up on a farm. I don't want to see Kansas turned into a giant industrial wind farm. But that is the aim across the state. As a matter of fact, we've got 4,000 wind turbines in Kansas right now, with another 6,500 in the pipeline. So we're talking over 10,000. Brian talked about the decommissioning costs. I think Kurt did as well. Actually, in 2018, I talked to an expert back in Washington, D.C., 4 years ago, okay? He told me it would be $1 million per turbine. It's very hard to find the information, but just to bring one of these big cranes out costs about $180,000. Just to carry off one of the blades with a semi could cost you $35,000 to $40,000 per blade. So right there, you're up over $200,000. Then you've got 500 tons of steel to get rid of. You're never going to be able to do that. They say, well, you can recycle that steel. No, you can't. 500 tons of steel, they will just leave them, okay? And that's why they structure their legal entities as LLCs. I also want to mention that I've spoken in a number of communities like this around Kansas. Seneca, Sabetha, Mound City, Fort Scott. I've spoken on the Missouri side. I've been in contact with people all over Kansas, some up in Iowa, some in Nebraska, Wyoming, Michigan, Indiana. I've been doing this for about 4 years, gathering information. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to go through my presentation very quickly, but I do want to open it up to a question and answer period and allow enough time for that, because a lot of times good information comes out of that better than me just standing up here and pontificating. But in every case, after I've spoken, the newspapers and the wind companies will try to dismiss everything I've said. And they'll probably try to do the same with Brian and Kurt, because there's a lot of money involved. And for the newspapers, it's ad revenue. For the wind companies, as has been said, there's a lot of money. The production tax credits alone cover 3/4 of the cost of a wind turbine. So the average wholesale electrical price in the state of Kansas is around $20 a megawatt hour. That's what it takes to produce that energy. So if you're subsidized at $15 to $18 per megawatt hour, you don't have to produce any electricity at all and still make a profit, because on top of that, you don't pay property tax. One thing that Kurt failed to mention, maybe didn't know, these wind turbines are depreciated within that 10-year payment in lieu of taxes time period. So once that 10-year period runs out, they're fully depreciated. They're never going to pay what they normally would, and we're giving up millions and millions of dollars in the state of Kansas. They're really not contributing much at all to the state. I called Coffee County and was able to find out how much they're paying per turbine. And it's somewhere around between $5,000 and $6,000 per turbine. I pay more than that per year on the property tax on my house. And these turbines cost $4 million. The new ones, these big ones, are probably going to be closer to $5 million per turbine. Okay? So does it make sense that I'm on a house that's more than 10 times less than the cost of a turbine, I'm paying more property tax? You probably will be as well. And then we talked about the safety hazards. What I've tried to do at the state level as the utilities chairman in the state senate is try to set safety and health standards for people who live around these things. The interesting thing is that the wind companies, as Brian mentioned, are the ones who set the standards. So it's the fox guarding the hen house. The ice throw data, just alone, 3,200 feet. I brought in a couple sound experts to testify before the committee. These guys are up in Iowa and also in Michigan. And with regard to the sound, they also work with a cardiologist who's done a lot of study. He said the only way to mitigate the sound is setbacks. Get the distance from those turbines. And because of that swish thump, instantaneous pulse, the cardiologist said 1.25 miles to mitigate the sound is where you should be from those, because the sound's going to shift as the turbines shift. Okay? So we've got farming issues, we've got health issues, we've got the hazards, there's turbine fires. Your fire department is not going to be able to put out a fire on a 600-foot turbine. They're going to have to let it burn out. They're going to have to mitigate any wildfires that develops around this. There's over 200 gallons of lubricants inside each of these nacelles. That's the part that holds the blade assembly. So if that catches on fire, those things do overheat. And blade fires are much more frequent, or not the blade fires, but the turbine fires are much more frequent than people realize. The ice throws, we've got also, it affects signals, radar signals. It can give a false tornado echo. So your warnings out here may not be as good from the National Weather Service from that. So there's all these different issues that we've got. So I'm going to go into it. There is a handout that I don't know if you've got. You might pick one up on the way out if you don't. Basically, some of the things I'm going to talk about are listed with the link at the top. Roger McCowan, who's a law professor at Washburn, wrote a nice paper about 4 or 5 years ago for anybody who's considering signing up for a land lease. And one of the things that he pointed out, you may think that the wind company's on the hook for any tort or lawsuits. Not necessarily the case, particularly because public nuisance is an interference with an unreasonable interference of the right that's common to the general public, meaning it interferes with public health, safety, comfort, convenience, or is illegal. So if you agree to put a turbine on your property and sound transmits over to your neighbor's property and starts impeding their ability to enjoy their land, you may be at risk. You may be legally liable. There are nuisance lawsuits that you might be liable for. Did you sign up for that? Did you read that in that 35 or 40-page lease? I've seen these leases, and it doesn't really talk about that. In fact, there's a warning in these leases that says they are not necessarily liable for ice throws, fires, stray voltage, sound issues, things like that. So I would highly recommend that all of you go on and look at that top link. It's very easy to find. It's about a 10-page read, but it talks about some of the tort liabilities that can come. Stray voltage, for example. There was a big lawsuit up in Wisconsin where a dairy farm, the cows all dried up. There was stray voltage from a nearby wind farm that was getting somehow over to the dairy farm, and the cows just flat died. They lost all their dairy cattle. And the wind company had to settle for millions of dollars because of the loss on that. So those are some of the things that, if you sign a lease on a turbine, you might be liable for. There's also watershed issues. When they build these turbines, they have to change the grading of the land. And it may change how the water sheds off onto your property. All of a sudden you may get flooding where you didn't have it before, or it may dry up some of the water that comes onto your land. So there's a lot of issues to consider. Now, the other legal issues are liens. Say the wind company defaults. Brian mentioned that they've already sold some of these before they ever signed the contract with the county. If these wind companies default on the lien, you're stuck. And if you read those contracts very carefully, a lot of times you can't use your own land as collateral for something you might want in the future. So liens can work both ways. In fact, I believe the one lien I saw from Labatt County prevented you from having a lien on your house, on your property in any way. Say you didn't pay your property tax. You've got to clear that up. So there's all sorts of things in those thick leases you have to be very, very careful. The road construction issue, millions of dollars of damage, you're not going to get covered on that. There's also estate planning issues. A lot of these are long-term leases. I've heard some as much as 90 years. So they're going to be intergenerational. You sign the lease, your kids are going to end up dealing with it. Whether or not it might interfere with how you transfer your land when you pass on. There's farming operation interruptions. You know, a lot of these farms, I've heard anecdotal evidence from people who've stood up and said, listen, we live near these wind turbines, all the deer, all the wildlife just evacuates the area. What impact is it going to have on your cattle or any other livestock that you have? Land restoration, they only promise the top 48 inches of soil. That cement, tons and tons of cement goes down deep. They're only going to shave off the top 48 inches. They're going to leave the soil compacted. They might say they're going to restore it back to how it originally was. It's going to impact whether or not you can farm that land in the future. All of these things that I've seen have gag orders, so they do that for a reason. They want to sign as many of these leases as possible without anybody knowing. They collect them, then they go to the county and they say, hey, we've got people who signed these leases. You're interfering with their property rights. We will sue you. They've done that in counties in Kansas, and they're doing it all over the place. So at that point, the county commissioners go, what do we do? We're going to get sued. We're going to have to get a lawyer. It's a horrible tactic. And one of the bills that we tried to run this year was a transparency bill. So that once somebody has signed a lease, they had to record it with the county so that it was public knowledge. So people could at least find out what was going on and be able to get informed on it. Bottom line is, if you're going to sign one of these leases, or if you're going to be nearby one of these leases, it's probably a good idea to consult an attorney. Some of the restrictions that we talked about this year in some of the bills, I had 8 different bills, each for different things. One of those is setback requirements. That was Senate Bill 353. Tried to ask for a mile setback. We got fought tooth and nail from the wind company and their lawyers. This is the most frustrating thing to me. We had people from all over the state come and testify. We tried to get the information to senators and people who are decision makers. And you present all of these facts, everything that you've heard from the previous 2 speakers, and it's no big deal. The wind companies put a lot of pressure, a lot of lobbying pressure on legislature. It's very frustrating. And so, you know, it takes a county-by-county action at this point. The attempts to get a state-level safety standards are still there. I tried this year, could not get it out of committee for a number of different reasons. So it's up to the counties at this point to stop it, and the best time to stop it is before it gets in there. I mentioned some of the hazards, the decommissioning, the radar-activated lighting systems. That was a no-brainer. That was one bill that we had where the lighting is approved from the FAA. They have a radar-activated lighting system so that whenever there's no aircraft around, it shuts the lights down, tries to get rid of some of the lighting issues. Couldn't even get that bill through. So it's very, very frustrating. We've already talked about some of the road issues, the insurance requirements on the property damage. We talked about the 10-year tax exemptions, already covered some of that stuff. One other way they're subsidized, aside from the production tax credit, which I don't think will ever go away, the federal government, as far as I can tell, is never going to do it. They extended it to 2038, I think it was. So those are not going to go away, unfortunately. And on top of that, there's something called a virtual power purchase agreement, where the wind company will take money from some remote organization, say a Facebook. This actually, I think it was, there's Facebook in Nebraska that said they were buying electricity from Jayhawk Wind down in southeastern Kansas. First of all, none of the electricity is ever going to get up there. What they do is they give money to the wind company, and in return they get a tax credit. It's called a virtual power purchase agreement because it's a giant Ponzi scheme. The company gets to say they're green, they're powering part of their facility with green energy, solar or wind, and they're not. They're just getting a tax credit for giving them money. So on top of the fact that they're not paying property tax, on top of the fact that they're getting these production tax credits, they're also being able to backdoor fund through these virtual power purchase agreements. And so they literally don't have to produce any electricity at all to make a profit on it. It's a great deal. It's a great deal if you could get it. The trouble is it's undermining the base load in Kansas. Kansas is part of the Southwest Power Pool, which is a 14-state power grid. But Kansans are paying almost 20% of the cost for transmission lines that it takes to put these things online. We're also paying for the extra peaking power through gas peaking generation that's required for this. And we're paying in a backdoor way because every time the wind does come online, when there's way too much electricity on the grid, our coal plants and our nuclear plants and our gas plants that provide electricity 24/7 are operating at a loss. So what has happened down in Texas, you remember that winter storm, February before last, thousands of people died, or hundreds of people died, thousands were without power for weeks. The wind froze up. They had retired 6 coal plants in Texas. They didn't have the power. That's where we're going to end up in Kansas if we're not careful. I'm going to show you a little more on that here in a minute. This is just a couple other things we could talk about. The CRP, is it affected? I'm not sure. Power outages due to the turbines. What's kind of interesting is the way the grid is set up. If High Ridge, or this one, High Banks comes in, Irish Creek, and also I think it's Soldier Creek. Yeah, all 3 of those are going to be tied to one transformer. What happened in Neosho County, a transformer blew out. That wind farm has been offline for a couple weeks now. Those transformers, if you know about the supply chain right now, it can be months before we get these transformers. And if it's a certain type of electric transformer, it could be a year. So that thing could be offline for a long, long time. The transformer in Lansing, Kansas blows, it could shut down all 3 of those turbine farms just like that. And it could be a long, long time. So anybody who's expecting these payments, if you read the lease very carefully, if their electrical production doesn't live up to that lease, they can pay you less. All of a sudden, you think you're going to get this money, you're not. So there's some very, very weak points in the electrical grid. And these, by the way, are electric. Everybody thinks the wind turns these things. No, no, no. The blade assembly is 38 to 40 tons. You don't turn a 40-ton blade assembly with a 10-mile-per-hour wind. It does not happen. These are electric. There's electric motors inside those nacelles. Those nacelles weigh 50 tons. To turn those, the wind won't turn them. You have to have electric motors to turn the nacelle into the wind. There are heaters inside the nacelle and dehumidifiers that have to run. They have to heat the blades. It is very possible, and we can't get good data on it, but I saw a great article said that up to 50% of the electricity that they produce is actually consumed by their electrical use. Why are we paying for a generator that uses as much electricity as it produces sometimes? It makes absolutely no sense. You'll drive by some of these wind farms where there's almost calm winds. You'll see the wind, the blades turning. That's because it's maintenance mode. You can't leave one of these blades sitting out in a perpendicular manner. They'll warp. They're made of a fiberglass resin, so they have to keep them turning. It's a maintenance mode. There are co-ops in this state that have told me, CEOs of the co-ops have told me, the wind farms are their biggest customer. So you're going to be competing for electricity against the wind farm, and your electrical rates are going to go up. They have all across Kansas ever since. Let's go back to that one. Talked about dispatchable and non-dispatchable power. We're trying to replace dispatchable power, meaning nuclear, coal, gas, something that we can control. We're trying to replace these with non-dispatchable power, wind and solar. We have no control. You're not going to get solar power today. You might get a little bit of wind power, but in the 50s, the wind or the electrical usage or demand is fairly low. On top of that, we talked about the fact the wind doesn't blow all the time. I'll show you in a second about that. And it's variable. It's an inconsistent speed. So even when it does blow strong enough, it's going to, with gusts, it'll speed up and slow down. It's just not a good consistent power like those dispatchable sources are going to be. Here's the interesting thing about virtually all these turbines. There are different speeds. There's what they call the cut-in speed, which is the speed at which it barely starts to produce any electricity at all. And that's less than 10 miles an hour. It's not going to produce any significant electricity. The rated speed, say a 2 megawatt turbine, has to have wind speeds consistently around 25 to 31 miles per hour, consistently 24/7 to produce the amount of electricity they're designed to produce. And then there's a cutout speed when the wind is too high. They have to shut them down because it's dangerous. You can have blade failures, blade disintegration, things of that nature. So, this is why it's important. This is something I did a couple of years ago, but I just checked some of the new ones and the cutout speeds, and everything's about the same. And you'll notice they use meters per second because it's a little bit deceptive. So here's the power curve, and boy, you can't see it very well, but at 4 meters per second or 9 miles per hour, it's right there. That's how much power it's producing at 10 miles an hour, virtually zero. At 15 miles an hour, 7 meters per second, it's not half. There's your full power. That's where your wind speeds about 12 meters per second, which is about 27, 28 miles per hour. So even at a 15 mile an hour wind speed, you're not even producing half of the energy that it's capable of doing. You have to have wind speeds running at least 20 miles an hour, 25 miles an hour to get even close. How often does that happen? Well, I just did the calculations from Concordia. This is the last 3 years. Less than 10 miles an hour. This is the average daily wind speed. Between 175, that is 2019, and 2021, there was 197 days in Concordia, which is the closest National Weather Service site, where the wind speed was less than 10 miles per hour. So almost, well, more than half of the year, those wind turbines aren't producing anything at all. They're actually using electricity. 15 miles an hour. These are the number of days where the wind speed finally got up over 15 miles an hour. You saw that power curve. It was not half speed or half power. Most of the rest of the days are in there. There was only 3 days in 2020 where we had enough wind for them to produce full power. 1 day in 2019, 2 days in 2021. So you're paying $4 to $5 million per turbine for them to produce their full capacity 2 to 3 days a year. The rest of the time, you're getting all the energy from nuclear, coal, or gas. So we're creating a parallel energy source just to put money out, just so that they can get subsidized through your tax dollars 4 or 5 different ways. Through your property tax, through your federal tax, because they get the production tax credit from you, through virtual power purchase agreements, through the fact that you're paying higher energy bills. There's something on your energy, well, at least in ours, we have an ECA, it's called the Energy Cost Adjustment. That's because these, our baseload plants are having to adjust their energy usage because they have to contract next day for the amount of energy they're using. So they contract to, say, a gas peaking power plant. They still have to honor those contracts if the wind comes online, but they're forced to take the wind first. So if there's no demand and the wind comes online in the middle of the night, they have to take that wind, they have to shut down all those plants that they contracted for, they will operate at a loss, and you saw the number of days this happens. Half of the year, okay? This is ridiculous. We're losing money on this proposition. Chanute, as you can see, is even worse. Southeast Kansas, look at those numbers, 200 to 234 days a year where the average daily wind speed is less than 10 miles an hour. Rates in Kansas, average retail electricity rate since wind came online in 2002 went from below national average to above national average. There's your average retail price of electricity, goes up, up, up. It's commensurate with the number of turbines in Kansas. We haven't added any other different generating capacity. This is from the EIA, this is from the federal government. So, like I said, we went from below national average to above. In co-ops, it's even a little bit higher, unfortunately, paying 14 to 15 cents a kilowatt hour. We're losing billions of dollars in GDP because our oil producers in Kansas are paying such high electrical rates right now. I've talked to one of the big oil producers down around Wichita. He's got a number of his wells shut down because they're marginal. He can't afford to pay the electric rates. He said, if I could move my wells to Oklahoma, I would do it today. Because Oklahoma's paying less than half. And so we're running businesses out of Kansas. We're running people out of Kansas. Property taxes are already high. You add electrical rates onto that, it's ridiculous. In fact, Kansas households are paying somewhere around $1.2 million, or $1,200 more per year on your electrical rates. And that's primarily because of the institution of wind. Plus, on top of that, now they're going solar because the investment tax credit is 250 times higher for solar than it is for wind. How close we're talking about setbacks? This is just an example of how close some of these wind turbines look when they're, 2,000 feet away, 3,000 feet away. Look at that one right there. 3,900 feet away. It looks like it's right in the backyard, doesn't it? These things are tall, and you guys got the biggest ones in Kansas coming down the pipe. Now, of course, the blade disposal, we get rid of about 8,000 per year around the country. That number's going to go up as the numbers continue. That costs a lot of money. We're not even talking about how much that costs, millions and millions of dollars. And the lease impact, this is a sample I borrowed from a fellow down in Anderson County because they were fighting the same thing, and this is an eye-opener. So here's a farm that has, I think, 160 acres, and what happens if they sign the lease, okay? Well, they're going to put 2 windmills on 160 acres. There's the farm right there, there's windmill 1, windmill number 2, keep it as far from the house as they can, put 1 per 80 acre, try to make some common sense, try to keep it away from the property line if you can. So the exclusive use area around the turbines looks like something like this. So that's the land right around the turbines you won't be able to use. However, on top of that, whenever they replace the blades, they say the blades might last 3-4 years. I've heard recently of some being replaced almost every year. I would say the blade life is about 3 years. They wear out, they deform just from operating and dust blowing against the leading edge. So they bring in one of these giant cranes. Every time a blade needs to be replaced, they tear up the roads, they recompact your soil, and there has to be a 500-foot easement. So all of a sudden, we gotta shut things down here. You got the cows. Well, that's, still got a little bit of room to roam. So there's just even for that. Here's some pictures taken in Waverly, Kansas, when they were building the Waverly wind farm. And as you can see, it just makes a muddy mess out of things. You're going to have to pay for repairing those roads. And a lot of these wind companies don't pay enough to do that. Then on top of that, they have this on this particular lease, but you have to be careful because it might be buried in your lease as well. No lessor or any related person of lessor shall construct or install or permit any person or entity to construct, install any building, structure, or other improvements within 1,000 feet measured from the center of the base of each generator. So all of a sudden, I've got that little corner and that little corner of my 160-acre farm that I can use. Not a big deal, right? And for the purposes including the right to excavate, grade, level, and otherwise modify the land, they can change your land. They can modify it as necessary. They can, without your permission, once you sign that lease, it's buried in a lease I've seen, they can put an electrical substation on it. I think they have to pay you $5,000. They put an electrical substation on your land, all of a sudden you're subject to tie lines and things like that. They can also put water wells on your land, batch plants, temporary batch plants. So if you want a cement plant on part of your land, are they going to clean that up? I don't know. So even after all that, you've got these long leases. It says, this is again on this lease, just an example of why you need a lawyer. Lessor shall pay as and when due all debt and other obligations secured by a mortgage, deed of trust, or lien on lessor's interest in the property. In other words, I talked about this earlier. You get a lien on your property, you got to clear it up. You got to take care of it. So there are all sorts of restrictions on your land use. And you say, okay, that's your neighbor's problem, right? Well, no, because there is the problem of eminent domain. They are going to have to hook that up to the grid somehow. Now, you happen to be in the unfortunate location close enough to the Grain Belt Expressway that that's why they're putting this in here. And so you're going to have to deal with the transmission lines and the cost. And they will find a way to put that cost on you. It does have to go through the Kansas Corporation Commission, but there's statutory reasons why, if they are capable of producing electricity, that has to be approved. And so it's a big problem. Plus, wind's not green. The reason that all of this happened is because back in the 90s, Al Gore started this big climate change scam. And I can talk for 2 hours about that if you really want me to, and explain why it is a scam. But we've convinced everybody through soundbite, false science, that reducing our carbon footprint is the way to go, which is why we're doing all this green energy. Think about carbon footprint. Carbon and CO2 are not the same. You think about carbon footprint, you think, oh gosh, dirty, think dirty, sooty, soot in the air. CO2 is necessary for plant life. At 400 parts per million, which is where we are right now, plants are just finally coming off a diet. There's only been 2 other times in the Earth's history that we can find when CO2 levels have been this low. This is one time, and there was another time millions of years ago. But the bottom line is, since we came out of the little ice age, when CO2 levels are about 200 parts per million, 240 parts per million, we've finally gotten up to 400 parts per million. There was a big Harvard study on agriculture that showed that plant life thrives, produces more crops, and is more drought resistant at 1,200 parts per million. We should be celebrating increasing amounts of CO2. We should be allowing it to flourish. At 1,200 parts per million, your crops are going to do a lot better. It's a natural fertilizer. We're going to have more emissions the more we add this, because wind turbines don't operate without fossil fuel electricity. They are electric animals. Same with the solar farms. When the electricity is not being generated by these things, we have to still rely on fossil fuels or nuclear, which I think is a good way to go. The lifespan's overstated. We've known that for a long time. Studies in Germany have shown that even though they may say these turbines will last 25 years, in most cases, in experience they've had in Europe, it's more like 12 or 13. And they also lose huge amounts of their production factor very quickly. This is saying that the electricity it actually produces compared with its theoretical maximum is reduced from 24% in the first 12 months of operation to just 11% after 15 years. So you got a 40-ton blade assembly on this generator up there. It is going to wear it out very quickly. There's going to be times they're going to have to repower. They lose efficiency very, very rapidly. Again, why are we doing this? Property value concerns, you heard about that. It's difficult. I've talked to a number of different realtors that said, your property's not going to be worth, if you live near one of these things, or if you, even once a wind farm is announced, and find out that you're going to be near one of these things, who's going to buy your property? Once that turbine's up in your backyard, your chance of selling that property is going to drop through the roof, drop through the floor. It's going to be very, very difficult. So they can say, oh, it's not a big deal. What kind of sucker are you going to get to have one 1,200 feet from your house to buy that? And then if they don't have a setback of any more than 1,200 feet, then your ability, or whoever buys your property's ability to put new outbuildings on the land is going to be restricted because of the hazards. Just the ice throw alone, 3,000 feet. Actually, the apex study was 3,200 feet. So it does have an impact on your property. So some final thoughts. Turbine heights are growing. These 600 footers will expand the scope of the hazards. So the ice throws might be even greater because they're taller. The statewide impact on farming is going to be a problem. County zoning, one of the things we ran into at the state level, there's about 50% of the counties in Kansas that are unzoned. We have a lot of counties that will come to us when we try to set a statewide standard and say, we don't want you to tell us what to do at the state level. Local control is a big issue, but from county commissioners I've heard from, they need help. When these wind companies come in, they come with attorneys who've done this all over the country. They do this every day, all day. And these county commissioners are in a very challenging position. They're not even sure what questions to ask sometimes. I talked to one from Osage County this morning, and she was trying to get up to speed on what issues to think about. Decommissioning is huge. You know, like Brian said, who's going to pay for that? It won't be the county. It won't be the landowner. You can't. At the current number of turbines we have in the state, we're talking $3 to $4 billion to decommission the ones that we have now. You add another 6,500, we're talking over $10 billion. That's more than the state general fund, okay? We can't afford to do it, so it just doesn't make any sense. And last but not least, heed the bad examples. Look at where they've had it. Get this thing stopped before it even starts. It's going to be tough because I know the leases are already being signed. You have to convince county commissioners. This is not a good thing for your county, for development-wise, financial-wise. You know, you'll have to. I know individual landowners have to make their own decision, and that's up to them. But counties do have a lot more power than you realize. We've seen other counties in Kansas fight this. You can require bigger setbacks. At the bottom, for the reference, I referenced some of the bill numbers that we had this year. You can look at some of that for a guideline. Senate Bill 323, 324, 325, all the way up through 478. I actually ran a bill to try to force wind companies to pay the full property tax from year one. Got close in that one. Couldn't quite get there. But the bottom line is, this is a very serious issue for this county, both the public in Washington County, and it takes a lot of work from residents to work together to try to get what you need to protect your property, protect your safety, protect your health. It's very important. So with that, I think I'm going to open up to any questions you might have. We covered a lot of ground over the last hour and 15 minutes, and I know everybody's probably getting tired, but anything you want to know? Yes, sir.
How long has the longest wind farm been operating in Kansas? So,
not 10 years yet. None of them are online. I can think of some of the older ones, probably maybe getting close to 10 years, 2012, 2013, right around there. Yeah. But again, remember those ones that were instituted that long ago, the heights were 200 to 300 feet. So they're going to be double in height here and much bigger. And again, we know of some where they've been replacing blades, in some cases every year. Every 2 or 3 years would be what I would expect. Yes, sir.
If these landowners sign these leases, is there a way out of them at this point?
Very tough, very tough. I've had that question in other towns and farmers who had signed it. And then they saw the presentation, we talked about the liability issues, the long-term impacts on their ability to use their land. They turned white as a sheet. It's very difficult. I'm sure the wind company is going to do everything they can. We try to, again, this is one of the bills we did, try to, just on the front page of the lease, get it in bold print, please consult an attorney before signing this, and give you a 10-day period for right of rescission, so that you could talk to people, and so that there would be no gag order during that time of consideration, so that we could talk to neighbors and kind of get information, share information. Transparency is not something they really want, and I've seen this for the last couple of years. Well, more than that. The last 3 or 4 years, virtually in every community I've gone to, it sneaks up on the landowners. They get the leases signed, they're as quiet as they can be. There needs to be transparency. And the county can issue a moratorium. They can set their own setbacks. They've tried that in Madison County, Iowa, requiring a mile setback. So counties have that control to do that. We're trying to do it as statewide as a standard to help protect counties, but in lieu of that, until that happens, that's why I want to give you these bills. Take a look at these bills and see some of the things that we were attempting to institute for safety and health reasons this year. Yes, sir.
I'm reading some information, and it alluded that the power companies have the right to set the in lieu of tax rate. Is that possibly true? Would the county commissioners have that right? And would that be a form of control? To say, you know, you're getting all these benefits, so in lieu of taxes, we're going to set a higher standard.
I would, yeah. In fact, my suggestion would be to set the payment in lieu of taxes the same as they would pay a property tax.
There you go.
That would be my suggestion, and the county can do it. And as part of the negotiation tactics, why give away the farm, so to speak, just so you can have a few people get leases?
Isn't that partly the fault of our federal government and even the state government being overwhelmed by the lawmaking group?
Yes.
So the pressure to put on the counties is tremendous.
It is tremendous.
And other people have shirked their duties, so now it falls back on the citizens of this county and Washington County to put the pressure on our commissioners and say, okay, here, in our best interest, you have to act this way. And to me, that sounds, everything I've heard tonight and the information I've read, that is our best recourse, is to demand that the county set a high enough in lieu of tax rate that at least we're protected to an extent.
That's a start. And I would require all these other things. If you look at what Madison County, Iowa's done, they've set all of these standards as a county up there. They want the setbacks, they want the radar activated lighting, they want the noise study. And if you do a noise study, you want the instantaneous max. You don't want an average. The wind company will say, oh, average of 45 decibel. Well, if you understand math, if you know math, all you guys do, averages just hide the peaks and the valleys, okay? That's just in the middle there. Oh, 45, not a big deal. But the swish thump, those are instantaneous pulses every second or so, okay? And much higher, and that's what causes the problems. And it is the infrasound. Those two audiologists and the cardiologists I talked to, the sleep deprivation causes heart problems. And the infrasound, you don't hear it. It's sub-audible for humans. Your dog probably hears it. But you'll feel it. It'll be that thump, thump, thump. What's interesting, too, whenever the turbine blade passes in front of the pedestal, there's a commensurate drop in pressure, air pressure. And it causes the pedestal, when it goes in front of it, that pressure drop causes the pedestal to do this. So it's constantly torquing that pedestal. There are tower collapses. These things will just go over. You want a house 550 feet from a 600-foot turbine that falls over, you're in trouble. You better hope it falls the wrong way, you know, or a blade failure. If you ever seen some of these YouTube videos of these, you know, a fairly decent wind, the blade disintegrates. That's spreading fiberglass particles out into the air. What are people breathing? Even the blade deformation that happens on a normal day. Who's to say that some of that fiberglass particle is not being released into the air just because of contact with birds, dust, anything that might be flowing in the wind? These things are not green. They might say they are. There's 1,000 pounds, the current turbines have 1,000 pounds of rare earth minerals inside of them called neodymium and dysprosium. They're both primarily mined in China, and they leave radioactive waste behind. So for every 1,000 pounds of those two minerals, they leave about 1,000 pounds of radioactive material behind where they are being mined. They've used child labor over there. These kids are dying of cancer. It's a mess. So these are, you know, it takes coal, tons and tons of coal to produce a 500-ton turbine. It takes something like 40 or 50 tons of coal just to produce the steel.
The county's got a lot of lodges in it. What does that do to the wildlife?
Oh, the wildlife, and I've talked to a lot of different people, like deer, and the wildlife evacuates the area. You see, this is, again, it's anecdotal, there's no studies on it, but they know better than to be near that stuff, and the animals don't like it. They absolutely don't. Like I said, talked about that dairy farm, the stray voltage somehow got into, you know, because what they do, they'll run the power down that pedestal and into the ground. Somehow it wasn't grounded correctly. Stray voltage got over onto one of the dairy farms, got into the metal, the fencing, and the cows were getting shocked a lot. And it just dried them up. They couldn't produce any milk. It was a mess. And the farmers lost everything, lost the entire herd, had to file lawsuits. The trouble is, these companies are huge. NextEra, for example, is an $18 billion company. They've got all the money in the world to do lawsuits. They'll always come in and tell you, well, you know, you can always sue your neighbor if you want to, if they sign the lease, or you can sue the wind company to sign the lease. Do you have the money to fight that kind of legal battle? It's better off to stop it before it starts if you're worried about that sort of thing. And it's better off to get fully educated on the situation. It's a tough job for the county commissioners. Too bad that the state level can't produce some kind of a minimum standards that the county commissioners say, well, there's what we have to live by. County, you know, this is the trouble that we deal with as legislature, local control, city and county. We don't want to tell them what to do, but in this case, I think it would help an awful lot. But the battle we have, even the Association of Counties comes in and they don't want us to set a standard because they don't want us to tell the unzoned counties what to do. And it's a fight, and as soon as some of these senators will hear this, they'll go, not going to do that. Or they'll go, oh, we might sue somebody. No, I'm not going to do that. It's insane. It's insane.
Well,
yes, ma'am?
What do the turbines do to rain patterns?
You know, we're not 100% sure. It's very, very localized. I've heard some farmers, and again, I've talked to a number of different places. Several farmers I've talked to said after the turbines were in, it altered the rain patterns around their land, and all of a sudden it dried up. You know, the atmosphere is huge, so it's hard to say that it would have a massive alteration of the weather pattern, but in a micro scale, I could see it having some minor changes. The big concern, I know, for the National Weather Service is the fact that it does impact the radar signals. And so a tornado vortex signature, a false one, could be generated by these things. So when a real tornado shows up, they may not be sure if there's one on there. But I've heard anecdotal evidence from farmers who live near these things that they're having differences in rain patterns over the crops. There haven't been any conclusive study to that end yet. Yes, sir.
On your last screen up there was a part that kind of disturbed me a little bit. It says right there, no reasonable legal remedy for a non-participating owner. What does that mean?
That exactly, the cost of litigating this sort of thing, once it's in there, is going to be virtually impossible. Are you going to fight an Xterra?
So what legal rights do I have?
Well, you could try to get a nuisance type of lawsuit going, but then they're going to get you with bringing in their expert witnesses. Legally, it's going to be very, very difficult.
So in other words, my neighbor that's participating has more legal rights than I do?
Yes. Unfortunately. But then what they're doing with their life, it shouldn't be the case. It should not be the case. But let's say your legal rights are the same, but your ability to protect those rights legally is going to be much harder for you than it's going to be for the wind company. That's what I mean by that. Did you have something you wanted to say, Brian?
In Neosho County, we attempted to sue to stop Apex from building Neosho Ridge Wind until we could determine if it's going to be a nuisance to the neighbors. We spent $125,000 and we never got to the courtroom before we gave up. They put us off until they were building them, and at that point it's kind of moved.
Yeah.
We stopped.
And that's
You have rights as far as your money goes, and you don't have it.
right. They'll run you out of money. They'll depose you to death. Yes, they will. They will. You'll bring your experts. They'll say, oh, they don't, blah blah blah. I saw this at the state level. I brought in experts all year long in an attempt to educate the other legislators on this, and it was frustrating and something I'll keep doing in an attempt to try to help out. But in lieu of that, it really does fall to the counties at this point, unfortunately. And so educating the county commissioners about what they're up against, being able to see these leases and making people aware. That's why that Washburn law thing, hand that to somebody who's considering signing a lease and make them read it, if they will. Yes, sir.
One thing, it seems that is kind of at the heart of this whole situation, is that we're not zoned. Well, zoning, if we were zoned, and it's done properly, does that protect us, or could that protect us from something like this?
Rather than having a zone, they may just decide that they need a conditional use permit or something that simple before they do it. And getting into the zone versus that's an issue that I'm going to have to address in the off session to try to figure out what we can do. But I think in this situation, something as simple as saying, hey, before you agree to this, they have to have a conditional use permit. I don't know. The zoning, what's that?
I'd like to visit with you just a little bit about that.
Yeah, the zoning issue is a big problem. I know that I heard, from counties that were zoned, and they said, well, we just don't want to do the work, and what are you paying for? Why are you paying tax dollars to the county if they don't want to do it?
Well, if the county does adopt zoning, can you make it as the citizens want it to be versus just
You have, yeah, I think they're.
Our county has gone through that a couple of times, that it was considered, and everybody got in an uproar, and like you say, private property rights, I don't want the county telling me what to do.
Right.
But we need to start looking at it as it can be a protection also. And everything can be abused, it's a real bitch.
Yep.
If you put in zoning that is fair and equitable to everybody, that commission's gone, the next commission comes in, they can change it.
Yeah.
So I realize it's a real bitch, but I wonder if it's not something that people we need to start considering.
And it's a process too. That's the problem. You're working against a ticking clock.
Oh, yeah, no,
Yeah,
I'm not talking about
Right.
taking care of this situation.
But I think the conditional use permit is one potential idea that you can use. Yeah. Am I out of time here? I think I'm out of time. Okay. Thank you all very much.
Appreciate your comments and your information, Mike. Okay, we have another guest to talk to us. He handed me a construction lien filed in Nebraska, and I'll hope he explains this better than I can. Anyway, I'd like to introduce Doug Nelson from Wayne, Nebraska.
Good evening, everybody. I'm from Wayne, Nebraska, about 3.5 miles, 3.5 hours north of here. And at the last minute, I decided to come down here and participate in your meeting, and I appreciate being asked to speak. About 12 years ago, I decided I was going to be the first guy up there to start building wind turbines. And I didn't want a developer because I was going to be the man. I'm going to make all this money. And a good friend of mine from my high school class was promoting me. But it didn't take very long, asking a few questions, finding out what they cost. I said to the man, his name was Dave, I said, Dave, I don't need a calculator to figure this out. This isn't going to work. At the time, I didn't know about the grants and the subsidies and the tax credits and the net metering arrangements. He said, 80% of this is covered. Don't worry, you know, but it's a paperwork nightmare to get into it. If you bear with me, I'll get going here. But I want to tell you that you have just heard some of the finest wind turbine information that I've ever heard. You got some excellent speakers, and I got a bag over there with about 20 pounds of paper in it, and these guys hit a lot of the things that I was going to talk about. So that'll shorten up my session a little bit, but I got some details that I can expand on. And what I'm going to see production tax credit, and I'm going to ask Mr. Thompson a question here in a few minutes. And I don't intend to put him on the spot. He may be able to answer the question, and that's fine. But if he can't answer the question, that's the point I'm trying to make. And but first of all, I want to talk about a construction lien here that was filed in Saline County on October 1st, 2021 for $30,852,298.89. It was filed by IEA Constructors, LLC, for the construction of wind turbines and all related materials on behalf of Milligan One Wind, LLC. So there is a discrepancy or a fuss or disagreement or something that IEA Constructors was not satisfied, and they filed a lien on 99 tracts of real estate. And the conduit for that lien was the lease that the landowners signed that was attached to their deed. So what these guys were talking about with liens being attached to the real estate, right here's the evidence. You can look it up on Nebraska Deeds Online. It's document number 2021-01863.
Excuse me? That was actually the second lien put on the ground.
Is that right?
There were 2 liens put in the first year against all the ground.
Well, I'll be darned. I did not know that. And I don't know if it's been released yet. I don't know what
it has been released.
Okay, but the point is, they got to the land. And I got a lease here. And I want to read you two quick paragraphs here. Page 21 has to do with construction liens. And you listen for a little double talk here. I'm just going to read the paragraph. Paragraph 9.5, it says, grantee shall keep the property free and clear of all liens and claims of liens for labor and services performed on and materials, supplies, or equipment furnished to the property for grantee's use or benefit. Sounds pretty good, but that's not a period. It's a semicolon. Provided, however,
that if such a lien does arise, grantee has a right to contest such lien, and grantee within 60 days after it receives notice of the filing of such lien either bounds around such lien or establishes appropriate reserves therefore, or otherwise removes such lien from the property pursuant to applicable law, in which case grantee shall not be deemed to have breached this section. Nothing in this section or this agreement shall be construed to prohibit grantee from granting one or more liens on all or any portion of grantee's right, title, or interest, which would be that lease, under this agreement as security for the repayment of any indebtedness and or the performance of any obligation relating in whole or in part to any of the wind project. Anybody detect some double talk there? That says, well, we won't allow any liens, but if we do, it won't be considered that we broke this paragraph. Okay. Page 6, purpose of lease. Throughout the term of this agreement, grantee shall have the sole and exclusive right to use the property. Enough said. For wind energy purposes. But then as they define wind energy purposes, it could be anything. It goes on, you don't need to know anymore. Wind energy purpose could be related to anything. Grantee shall have sole and exclusive right to use the property. This is crazy. Anybody that would, you don't need an attorney to read this, especially an attorney that is paid for by the wind company that's wanting you to sign this lease. That's one of the other deals. I wrote some proposed regulations for Cedar County, Nebraska. They're considering just an all-out ban and risking a lawsuit. But we were talking about separations, and I wrote a suggested regulation. I said, turbines shall have no less than a 2-mile separation from residential property lines and shall have no less than a 2-mile separation between turbines. Furthermore, any turbine sited within sight of any current county resident must have written permission granted by said resident to do so. Okay, we should also have height, noise, and shadow restrictions. A couple of years ago, I read about a prototype turbine produced by Virginia University that is 500 meters tall, which is over 1,600 feet. Now that would be supported with cables, and it has a helicopter blade on the top of it, so the cables can work. So if you draw a 45-degree angle from 1,600 feet out, you'll be right out to the corner post on a quarter section. And you'll have dozens of cables coming down. So these turbines you've got today at 600 and 650 feet may be just midgets. So, you got to keep that in mind. The sky's the limit. Another thing, the statute of limitations runs out on depreciation recapture in 5 years on these things. So if you get them fully depreciated in 5 years, you sell the project 1 day later, you do not have to recapture the depreciation write-off that you've taken. Okay? So that's huge. So selling these things becomes part of the business plan approximately every 5 years. They'll be sold, and that's part of the plan because they'll sell them and they'll depreciate the project all over again. And I'll tell you how it works here. I'll take this with me here. Maybe I'll take this with me here. Okay, some years ago, maybe 10 years ago, a company called Turbine started a project near, about 10 miles east of my place. And Turbine is a Kansas City-based corporation, Kansas City, Kansas. Turbine is a subsidiary corporation of Enel. I'm not sure what that acronym stands for, but Enel owns Turbine. So Tradewind started the project, and after some years had passed, Tradewind approached the Wayne Airport Authority. And Wayne Airport has a non-directional navigational beacon, or they did have, but it doesn't anymore. And they went down to a meeting and said, we'll give you $500,000 if you would please remove that NDB. Well, that's a lot of money for an old obsolete navigational beacon. It's a carryover from World War II, and GPS has made them obsolete. However, my airplane has an ADF in it that's a receiver for that transmitter, and I still used it, as a few other pilots did too. And all of a sudden it was gone, so I started asking a few questions. The airport authority took that under advisement, and a couple meetings later they said, you know what, for $1.5 million, we'll take that NDB out of there, expecting maybe they would settle for $1 million. Guess what? They said, okay, sign right here, $1.5 million to get rid of an old obsolete navigational beacon. They wrote them out a $300,000 payment on the spot, and I got the copy in my notes here. I got the copy of that document. And then when that wind farm was finished, they said that we'll pay the $1.2 million balance. Well, coincidentally, right after that contract was signed, this wind farm was sold to a new wind farm called Rattlesnake Creek. And this is the one that was referred to that has connections with Facebook. And I was at a hearing in Lincoln, Nebraska, a natural resource hearing, when one of the senators questioned the wind representative and said, so how does that power go right there from the windmill down to Facebook in Omaha like it's got a long extension cord to it? Well, it doesn't happen. That power goes on the line, it goes path of least resistance to whoever needs it. But I'll get to that in a minute. Okay, Rattlesnake Creek bought this wind farm from Tradewind right after that NDB was removed. That eliminated FAA regulations for height and proximity regulations so they could build taller and closer to the Wayne Airport. Pretty nice. So now Rattlesnake Creek is over there. And guess who owns Rattlesnake Creek? One guess? Two guess? No. The right hand sold to the left hand. Why? These guys took the depreciation and the tax credits and sent back home. Then sold their project to these guys for a price I don't know. There was a $430 million number mentioned in some of my literature. It could have been that. So now these guys can depreciate it and take the tax credits. Guess what? It's in that same place. So the money's leaving the country, and it's not only leaving the country, it's leaving the country tax-free. And that brings me to your question. Or my question to Mr. Thompson. The tax credit, and we're talking about income here, or money, but it's credit. Well, it's a credit against a non-deductible expense, namely taxes. So my question is, if that credit really was income, what type income would it be?
I'm not a tax expert, I'm not sure.
Any tax experts here, accountants? Okay, let me explain that. Would it be taxable income or tax-free income?
You would get it, it would be like a rebate. You don't have to pay taxes to get the money back. Correct?
Correct.
So you would get a rebate from the government even if you didn't pay a dime.
Okay, a refundable tax credit.
Right.
And it's a monetized tax credit in that respect. This guy's on it.
Yes.
But most of us don't think about that. You gotta ask the question first to figure it out. And to make it simpler, think of a taxpayer that's in the 50% tax bracket, for instance. And he wants to buy a $100,000 motorboat. And he could say that that motorboat, being a non-deductible expense, represents $100,000 of his after-tax income, or his tax-free income. Or he could say that that motorboat represents $200,000 of his net income. Either answer would be correct if he referred to it as such. So the point I'm trying to make here is if a tax credit is tax-free income, and you want to think of it in terms of net income, you must consider what tax bracket the taxpayer's in. In this case, if a taxpayer is in a 50% tax bracket, the tax credit is doubled in terms of net income. This is huge. I mean, really huge. Because the investors in wind turbines are in very, very high tax brackets. It doesn't work any other way. For instance, we got a NextEra operation just west of me, and I know the project manager. I've debated him a time or two, and he took me and my wife out for supper, and I learned a lot from that guy. And he learned a few things from me too. But one of the things he told me, and not necessarily in confidence, because I asked him in public one time if I could repeat what he told me as far as the financials on that wind farm. And he said, we have got a long-term contract with Omaha Public Power for 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour. And Omaha Public Power will buy everything we got when we have it for that price. Okay, let's do a little take a look here at what that thing's going to generate. Let's assume a 1 megawatt generating capacity, not necessarily one turbine, but 1 megawatt of generating capacity. Does anybody know what that is? A megawatt? A megawatt?
It's 1,000 kilowatts.
That's right, it's 1,000 kilowatts. So you got 1 megawatt equals 1,000 kilowatts. You run that thing for an hour at 100% efficiency and it'll generate 1,000 kilowatt hours. You can sell these. These are units of electricity. But the guy told me that their turbines were 40% efficient. And I said, no, I don't think they are. Oh yeah, these new turbines are 40% efficient. So I said, okay, we'll say they are 40%. I don't care if they're 100% efficient, this thing won't work. But 40% efficient, all right, times 0.4, that equals 400 kilowatt hours that you're going to create every hour. And you're going to take that times 0.015 cents. So 1.5 cents a piece times 400 of these is how many dollars? $6. This guy is sharp, but 95% of the people can't answer that question. 1.5 cents times 400 is $6. All right, let's run this turbine 8,760 hours. That's a year. The wind don't blow steady for a year, but let's do it. That's $52,560 you're going to generate. Right there, you're going to generate. Now, one of these other gentlemen said that a megawatt cost a turbine cost in the neighborhood of $4 million, okay? I got information on Warren Buffett's Mid-American Energy in Iowa, and that says a little over 2.4 million per megawatt. So these numbers are pretty close. So let's just take a look. I want to do a little cash flow over here. Because you can't get these expense numbers from a wind company. It's their business. In spite of the fact that we pay a lot of grants and taxes, and, they say, well, I can do it. Okay, but here's what I can do. If I got a machine that cost me $2.4 million, let's just write that up here. I can depreciate that. Let's just take 10% depreciation here. All right, $240,000 depreciation. Let's do, that's 10%. Let's do 5% for repairs and maintenance. That's $120,000. Let's do another 5% for labor. That's another $120,000. Let's do 1% for insurance. That's a reasonable number. And by the way, I checked with my CPA guy about my percentages. He said, you're conservative on every one of them, you'd pass an audit. Okay? 1% happens to be $24,000. Let's do 1% for taxes. In Wayne County, I pay about 1% for taxes of my land, on real estate taxes. So 1% should be reasonable. That's another $24,000. The nameplate tax in the state of Nebraska is $3,518. That's about 1/6, based on this number, is what I pay for real estate. And there's one other thing. Ask your commissioners, what is the degree of collectability of a Turbine property tax? You see, if you don't pay the taxes on your real estate, up in my way, somebody will step up and pay it for you and take a tax lien on your property. So those are very collectible taxes. But turbines are only attached to real estate. They're not real property. They're chattel property or personal property. So the degree of collectability on these things is very, very low. Who's going to force the payment of those? Who's going to step up and pay the taxes on a worn-out turbine? Probably nobody. So the degree of collectability of that tax is very, very low or next to zero. So I'm going to go on here. We're going to pay some rent to the farmer, and as near as I can calculate, they're getting about $10,000 per megawatt. I can't prove that. It's a gag order. I've never seen a contract. It's just a guess. Okay, we're going to put legal fees on here. We're going to have to throw $5,000 in just for the heck of it. We're going to put interest. Somebody's going to pay the interest on the money, because that money, that's capital that's coming out of the economy that some young entrepreneur can't get a hold of because it's tied up in a turbine. It's going to compromise somebody that needs some cash someday. So we're going to pay 3% interest on this, which happens to be $72,000. 3% of that, $72,000. We're going to pay for backup power. The consumers are paying for backup power now, and they're paying for it in their electric bill. Their electric bill's going up. Why? Because the wind don't blow all the time, and all of a sudden they got to fire up a gas plant to make up for it. And here's what happens in the gas plant. Wind's blowing, wind's not blowing. Wind's blowing, wind's not blowing. I got a chart in my file to show you that. And the dispatchable energy here is like driving your car clear to the floor and hard on the brakes. Clear to the floor and hard on the brakes. It's costing in efficiency 2.9 cents per kilowatt hour because of this. So they're not only trying to handle a demand that doesn't vary like this, they're also trying to manage the supply. So they're managing both sides of the equation here, and boy, that's precarious. Let me get back to my story here. Backup power. Backup power. I calculated that as an irrigator because I got two wells that got to run 4 pivots. And I got to run around the clock, on peak, off peak. If we get in a dry year, I got to do it. And I got to pay. So I did the calculations, and that comes up to $120,000 a year for me for backup power. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Got all of them. You add this up, you got $735,000 annual operating costs, and we haven't talked about lobbying expense. We haven't talked about meals, transportation, contingencies, raptor counts, fees to pay for killing eagles, stuff like that. We haven't counted any of that stuff. $735,000. Let's just take a look at interest alone. $72,000 at 3%, $2.4 million megawatt. Over here, what we generate? $52,000. We're $20,000 underwater. We can't even pay the interest, folks. But boy, do these things make money, and it's not about generating power. Here we go. Okay, thank you. The wholesale market, according to my next year guy, on their particular wind farm is 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour. 1.5 cents. Okay? That's a sale of a product. This is income. This is a taxable number. Okay? The 2.3 cent per kilowatt hour production tax credit is a tax-free number. But on its face value, 2.3 cents is 153% more than the 1.5. But wait, we got to compare apples to apples. This is a taxable number, and the 2.3 cents is a tax-free number. To put it in terms of net income, like this number would be, you'd have to double it for a taxpayer in the 50% tax bracket. Makes 4.6. So in reality, we're getting the number 4.6 cents. If you do this calculation, 4.6 divided by 1.5, you got 307%. That's why we're building wind turbines. There's your subsidy. This is huge. So, we're going to do one more fun thing here, and it's a real oversimplification of this system. Typically, hey, thank you. I thought maybe somebody a little better looking than you'd stop up here. Okay, this is a very oversimplified. This wind turbine business is very, very complex. It involves different entities. Usually it involves a holding company and tax equity financing. Do you know what that is? Oh, okay. Anybody know what tax? You probably all know what tax increment financing. But this is different. This is tax equity financing, and this is legal. It's a legal money laundering mechanism. It is, my next year guys say, monetize. It's a monetizing mechanism. Okay. I'm going to bypass that for the minute, make this very, very simple. But let's build a $500 million wind farm. Okay, that's $500 million wind farm. Senator Thompson and I are partners. We're in the 50% tax bracket. So here we go. First thing we're going to do is go get us an application for a 30% treasury grant. Okay? $150 million. 30%. Federal treasury grant. $150 million. Okay. Now, when we tell our accountant, when he asks us what that wind farm cost, do we tell him $500 million? Do we tell him $300 million? $350, I mean. This is a grant. This is our cost. This is our cost basis here. This is our depreciable number. If a taxpayer asks you what did the wind farm cost, you got to tell him this, because this was a grant from the taxpayer. Both numbers are correct. So, now the next choice we have here, do we want to take either a 2.3 cent per kilowatt hour production tax credit, or do we want to take a 30% investment tax credit? Right up front, get it over with. Well, we're a little new at this game. We just grab 30% here, take another 150 off. Okay? There we go. We got 200, we're down to 200 million. That's what that thing's going to cost us today, but guess what? We found a place or a loophole in the law that says we can take 100% depreciation, accelerated depreciation on this, for instance, on this number here. This number here. We're going to write off 350 million of our net income. Keep in mind, we're in the 50% tax bracket. 50% of this will save us in taxes $175 million. Tax savings. Now we got 25 million out of our pocket in the wind farm. Then we go borrow that from the bank. 5 years and 1 day later, we sell this thing. We ask for half price, 250 million. We get an offer at 200, and we counter at 225, and we make a sale. We sold for 225. 5 years and 1 day later, because if we did it for less than 5 years, we'd have to pay some of this back. Statute of depreciation runs out for 5 years in this. The statute of depreciation recapture. So, we sold it. We peel off this 25 million here, pay off the bank. Me and Senator Thompson got 200 million. We write a check. 100 you, 100 for me. We shake hands, and away we go. But there's more. We went to college together, and we demonstrated our business. You weren't. You know you weren't. You. I mean, I didn't want to insult. There was humor, you know.
I wasn't afraid of
I didn't mean that. I was just supposed to be okay, so here's, we were in college together, and, you know, we decided to demonstrate our business talents and abilities, and we wanted to make a few quick bucks, and so we started a arm's length, nocturnal pharmaceutical business. And we had some guys working for us, and some of those guys are still in jail. But we're not. But in the haymow, his grandpa's barn, we got $50 million of green cash with white powdery dust on it. And we can't touch it. We know it's there, but we're not going to go look. We're okay. We've changed our ways, toed the line. But we meet in the bar in Madrid, Spain one night, down in the basement, run into this guy. And we have a beer and we talk a little bit. The reason why I mention Madrid is because the turbines in the Rattlesnake project that we talked about earlier were made in Madrid. Shipped to Houston, hauled all the way up there. Okay, we're talking about this. And we've been around the block a time or two. We're thinking about this $500 million wind farm we just sold. We're thinking about building another one. Why? Because if we keep our books within 1% of being accurate, the auditors are not going to bother us. 1%, $500 million, $5 million. Let's write that down over here. $5 million. Okay. We said we're going to run this project for 10 years. This time, not 5. And we know that we're ridiculously low on legitimate income. That $6 an hour just didn't look quite right. So we decided we're going to peel off 10% of this number, which is $5 million. And we're going to bring it over here and declare it as income to subsidize the income, the low income on our wind project. We'll use the tax credits to pay the taxes on it. And in 10 years, we'll have this cleaned up. Sound like fun? Is this going on? I don't know. But I bet there's something going on. Okay. I got a little picture here in my folder here, and I'm going to get close to wrapping it up, I hope. I got a picture printed with permission of Range Magazine, and this is a picture of a bunch of turbines and some fog that got caught up in a little breeze and it blew through the turbines. And you can see back behind them is about a mile's worth of vortices, wind vortices. And the blades of the turbines are not so much responsible for killing birds as those vortices are. They're like a prop or a wing on a spray plane or a heavily loaded airplane, and there's turbulence behind them. They're horizontal tornadoes with very low air pressure inside and very high pressure outside, swirling around, trying to get into the low pressure. So you got 3 horizontal tornadoes peeling off of those blades, twisted in a helix for about a mile behind these turbines. And there's a whole bunch of them there. And a flock of birds will fly through there, and they'll, first of all, hit extreme turbulence, but they'll hit high pressure and low pressure and high pressure and low pressure in a series, and it'll collapse their lungs. Pretty soon they hit the ground, and that sudden stop usually does them in. And they find a lot of birds out there that can't find anything wrong. Well, the blade didn't hit them. These vortices got to them. And one thing, I got a friend sitting right here in the front row. Earlier on, we talked about animals leaving the area. In the United Kingdom, there was a study done on badgers, and they're kind of territorial. They don't like to leave. You know, I'm living right here, and that's it. Well, they found out by snagging a little hair off of those badgers, they found out it's really it takes a tough cowboy to take a blood sample out of a badger. So they put some barbed wire or something down the hole to snag a little hair, and they analyzed the hair on that badger. They found out that compared to the badgers that lived a long, long ways away from the turbines, I think that cortisol level in their blood was 264% higher. Is that correct? Is that the number? 264% higher. Cortisol is a stress hormone. And these badgers living next to the turbines, territorial, wouldn't leave. They were under stress, and that article proved it. It was replicated. So, we talked about vortices. Okay, I'm going to finish up here. Just a second. I'm getting really close. I'm a corn farmer, and I got an article in my file that says the nighttime temperatures in the areas of wind farms are warmer. Now, to me, that's huge. To the average guy that doesn't raise corn, well, what does that mean? Not much. Well, corn needs to cool off at night. The cells in the leaves that manufacture the sugars need to shrink, and cool temperature shrinks them, squeezes the juice out, puts it in the stalk, and down into the ear. And so if it doesn't cool off at night, it doesn't empty out the leaf so it can manufacture some more carbohydrates when the sun comes up the next morning. It gets constipated. It turns really, really dark green when that don't happen. If it's warmer at night, the corn isn't going to produce like it normally would. And if it's warmer at night, it may not penetrate the dew point. You may not get a dew. And to get your corn covered with dew about daybreak is huge, because it'll follow the leaf, go down the stalk, and it'll wet that root ball, and it'll give itself a drink by converting humidity into a liquid. And not only that, the cooling effect gives it one last shot of cool air. When the sun evaporates that off, the water evaporates, it's a cooling effect off of the leaf. Give it one last squeeze to get that juice out so it can go back to work when the sun comes out. But the dew is important for baby wildlife, especially baby pheasants and baby brown birds and stuff. They drink those dewdrops. So if you have warmer temperature at night, you may not penetrate the dew point. Okay, that's huge. The reason why it's warmer in the wind farms is because it's mixing the air. It's like a ceiling fan. It prevents the stratification of air. And of course, that can affect thunderstorms and things if you get enough of that going on. But the cool air at night, normally heavier and denser, settles down to the ground. And it'll get cool enough on a humid night, it'll make a dew. So that's why the turbines are air mixers. And it brings the warm air down, and the cool air can't stratify like it normally would. One more thing, 5% of the plants on Earth are in the C4 category. Corn is one of those plants. It means it's got 4 carbons in the leaf that's responsible for photosynthesis. Corn likes CO2. It takes that carbon off that molecule and uses it for its own construction purposes and breaks that oxygen molecule off to us. Very important. Because if you compromise CO2, you will not only compromise our food supply, you will compromise our oxygen supply. And oxygen, like sex, becomes very important if you're not getting any.
Wow. I got all of that? Okay. Appreciate everybody being here. Do closing notes. I'm not as long-winded as Nebraska corn huskers, believe me. Everybody, please pick up one of these sheets that shows your commissioners, their phone numbers, contacts. Get it. We've got a petition you can all sign. A sheet we'd like you to put your name, email address on if you'd like, so we can get a hold of you. Pack the courthouse. Every Monday morning at 9 a.m. they have got public comment. Be there. Show them you care. Show them you want them to do the right thing for all of us. Not just the ones getting the turbines or think they're getting the turbines. You don't have to be on the agenda to speak at all. Write letters to Telescope.
And what is the,
25 close.
What
We
is-
live here.
what is the deadline for the commissioners to be making the decision?
Okay. The possible deadline that we expect is the end of May for them to make a decision on all of this.
Okay.
So we've got 5 Mondays. Everybody be there. Yes, sir.
Any commissioners here?
No. They had emergency preparedness training tonight.
Yeah.
They were invited. Washington County Commissioners were also invited.
We are recording this and we plan to get it out to specifically our commissioners and anybody else who couldn't be here. So I don't know how we can hold their hands and make sure.
Yeah. Something I want to bring up. Everybody probably owns a house. So you get a 30-year mortgage on it, right? These people have signed leases for 90 years. 90 years. Kirk and Kelly have got a 5-year-old. That little girl is going to have to live with these her whole life. Do you want that? We live here. We work here. We bring up our children here. Our life is here. Our stake of quality life is at stake. We want to make it very clear our quality of life is not for sale at any price. I've got an old cowboy book for you. We did not inherit this land from our ancestors. We are borrowing it from our children. Do we want to leave them with this? Thank you all for being here. Please sign a petition.